There's no real advantage or disadvantage to this, it just takes some getting used to. The thing I like about it is the HUD is a lot more clean and simple compared to the American aircraft. You should probably also note the roll ticks along the artificial horizon. Those are at 5, 10, 15, 30, and 60 degrees of bank. Okay, let's go over the MFD. While it's a very useful tool, it's actually quite simple. All it is a top-down map of your flight plan, connecting the waypoints with lines, and you can also zoom in and out with the plus and minus keys on the keyboard. Very useful, very simple. Nice thing about the MFD is you can see visually how far you are away from the waypoint, when you should turn, and which direction you should turn, as well as how far you should turn. Here we're coming up on the waypoint. Up there's a switch, turning. Watch the director circle in the HUD. Notice it's dropped to the bottom. That means that the assigned altitude that we should be flying at is a lot lower than our current altitude. Actually, it's 2,000 meters. I'm going to maintain 4,000 meters for purposes of demonstration that you can still navigate with using the HUD and MFD even though you're not at your assigned altitude. Instead of flying my nose into the circle, I'm going to place it just above it, maintaining altitude. By doing this, I still let it direct my turn, but not my altitude. The MFD doesn't distinguish altitude, so therefore I can just fly by that and I won't have to worry about it. Let's have a look at our panel. Notice that the ADI shows the same thing as the flight director circle in the HUD, except instead of a circle, it's represented by two yellow needles. The horizontal yellow needle shows us how we should fly to maintain altitude, while the vertical one shows us how to fly to stay on course. By putting this circle in the aircraft symbol right on the cross of those two needles, you can fly at your assigned altitude and course. To fly just the course, all you have to do is just line up the vertical needle, as I'm doing now. This is exactly the same way you'd fly if you were looking at the director circle on your HUD. Become accustomed to the ADI because it'll be your backup when your HUD goes down. Below the ADI you have the HSI. In the upper left you have the range to the next waypoint, in the upper right the heading to the next waypoint. The yellow needle in the ring represents the direct heading to the next waypoint, and the white needles to either side of that represent the assigned course to that waypoint. When you have both of those lined up, you're on the proper heading and course to that waypoint. The waypoint just flipped, so we're going to turn. Notice how I can follow the vertical needle in the ADI, and I'm also turning onto course using the HSI. I can do this without looking outside the cockpit. This is good because when I can do this in crappy weather without having to look outside for bank angles and other visual references. Also notice that I'm setting up an intercept for the course. I'm not following the horizontal needle directly. See, it just flipped back. I had anticipated that, so I wouldn't have to make such jerky movements. I can make my turns nice and smooth. Here we are, lined up on course. Well, the ADI is a backup for the HUD, the HSI is a backup for the MFD. They each show slightly different information, but they can both be used for navigation, even without the HUD or MFD. Using the HUD and ADI, I'm actually going to put us back on to the assigned altitude at 2,000 meters. There we go. Let's have a look at these 4 lonely gauges over here. The upper left, we have the angle of attack, represented by the Greek letter alpha, and as well as the number of G's being pulled at this moment, as well as the maximum number of G's we pulled in this flight. So you can see we've pulled 4.5 G's on this flight so far. To the right of that, we have airspeed, with the inner ring showing current Mach. Right now we're flying at 525 or so kilometers per hour and at about 0.6 Mach at this altitude. Below that we have the altimeter, which will be read like a clock. The big hand, hundreds of meters, and the small hand, thousands of meters. Next to the altimeter we have the radar altimeter, which uses radar to determine altitude, but it only works under 1,000 meters. Here's the turn to the next waypoint. After this turn, I'll be switching to return mode to put us on course back to Krimsk. It's got a little darker up here. Turn on the cockpit lights. Okay, I just entered the return sub-mode, which plots a course directly back to the initial approach fix for an ILS landing at the airport. The initial approach fix, or IAF, is where we'll begin the ILS approach to Krimsk Air Base. It is represented by a diamond on the MFD. Note that the HUD is telling me to fly at a much higher altitude. However, it's going to drop down, and I'm not going to climb just to have to descend later. Also, note that the HSI's white and yellow needles don't line up. This is because we're not on the proper course from waypoint 5 to the initial approach fix. I switched right to return mode after waypoint 4, so we wouldn't have to go all the way to waypoint 5. 10 kilometers from the initial approach fix, we're going to start our descent into the clouds to 1,000 meters.